Commander Vexthal stood before the massive holographic display in his command chamber, his four arms crossed behind his back as he studied the swirling blue and green world that hung in the center of the projection. The planet looked so peaceful from here, so small and insignificant. Its single moon orbited lazily around it, and tiny metal objects moved in predictable patterns around both celestial bodies. "This is the target?" he asked, his voice carrying the deep, rumbling tone that marked him as one of the Zephyrian elite. "This primitive world that calls itself Earth?" Intelligence Officer Zektar stepped forward, her elongated head bobbing in confirmation. "Yes, Commander. Our scouts report that the dominant species has only recently achieved basic faster-than-light travel. They call themselves humans, and their technology is laughably primitive." Vexathal's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. He had commanded conquest fleets for over 200 cycles, and in all that time, he had never encountered a species that provided even the slightest challenge to the mighty Zephyrian hegemony. The pattern was always the same: arrive, demand surrender, and watch as the primitive aliens either submitted immediately or were crushed within days. "What do we know about their military capabilities?" he asked, though he was already certain. The answer would be disappointing. Zektar activated a series of smaller displays around the main projection. They possess nuclear weapons, but only the crude fission and fusion types. Their largest warships are barely 300 meters long. Most concerning of all, they appear to be divided into separate nations that frequently war among themselves. Divided? Vexthal's interest was piqued, but not in the way Zektar might have expected. A divided species was an easy species to conquer. "How many factions?" "Over 200 separate political entities, Commander. They cannot even agree on basic resource distribution among their own kind. Our psychological analysts believe they will surrender quickly once they see our superior force." Vexthal walked around the hologram, studying the planet from different angles. The continents were clearly visible, with bright spots marking major population centers. Primitive orbital stations dotted the space around the world, along with what appeared to be basic manufacturing facilities. Everything looked exactly as he expected from a species that had barely crawled out of its home system. "How many ships do they possess?" he asked. "Approximately 1,200 vessels total, Commander. Most are short-range patrol craft or cargo haulers. Their longest-range ships appear to be exploration vessels with minimal weapons." Zektar paused, consulting her datapad. "Our intelligence suggests they have perhaps 50 ships that could be considered true warships." The commander's mandibles clicked again. 50 ships against the 400 vessels of his battle fleet. It would not even qualify as target practice. He had conquered systems with 10 times the military strength without losing a single ship. What about their allies? Have they formed any sort of defensive pact with other species in this region? "None, Commander. They appear to be completely isolated. Our long-range scanners detect no other intelligent species within 50 light-years of their system. They are alone." Perfect. Vexthal loved conquering isolated species. There would be no outside interference, no desperate calls for help, no last-minute rescue fleets arriving to complicate matters. Just a simple, clean conquest that would add another system to the ever-expanding hegemony. He turned to face the other officers gathered in the command chamber. Representatives from all 7 species that made up the hegemony stood at attention, their various forms creating a rainbow of scales, fur, and chitinous armor. Each had contributed ships to this conquest fleet, though none doubted that Vexthal's Zephyrians would claim the lion's share of the glory. "How current is this intelligence?" he asked. "The most recent data is approximately 30 cycles old." "Commander," Zektar replied. "However, given their primitive state of development, it is unlikely they have advanced significantly in such a short time." Vexathal nodded. 30 cycles was nothing when dealing with primitive species. Most took hundreds of cycles to make meaningful technological advances, and these humans had only just achieved basic spaceflight. Even if they had doubled their fleet size, they would still be hopelessly outmatched. "Very well," he announced to the assembled officers. "We will proceed with standard conquest protocol. Jump to the edge of their system, broadcast the ultimatum, and give them the traditional 3 days to surrender. I expect this to be resolved quickly and with minimal resistance." The officers saluted in their various ways and began filing out of the command chamber. Vexthal remained behind, studying the hologram of Earth. Such a beautiful world, really. The blues and greens reminded him of his own homeworld, though the single moon was unusual. Most inhabited worlds had multiple satellites. Soon this world would join the thousands of others under hegemony control. Its resources would feed the ever-growing empire, and its population would serve their new masters. The humans would learn, as so many species before them had learned, that resistance to the hegemony was futile. He thought about the reports of human division and conflict. It was almost amusing how these primitive species always thought their petty squabbles were important. They had no idea what real power looked like. They had never seen a fleet of 400 warships appear in their skies. They had never witnessed the awesome destructive capability of hegemony weapons. Within days, their governments would be competing with each other to surrender first. The smart ones would realize immediately that cooperation was their only hope for survival. The stubborn ones would be made examples of, their cities reduced to glowing craters that would serve as reminders to future generations. Vexthal had seen it all before. The pattern never changed. He dismissed the hologram with a gesture and walked to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of his command chamber. Outside, the 400 ships of his conquest fleet hung in the darkness of space like mechanical stars. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels spread out in perfect formation, each one representing the pinnacle of military technology. The humans had never seen anything like this fleet. Their primitive sensors probably couldn't even count all the ships, much less comprehend their destructive potential. When they saw this armada appear in their system, their resistance would crumble instantly. It was almost too easy. Sometimes Vexthal missed the early days of hegemony expansion, when they occasionally encountered species with real fighting spirit. Those battles had been brief, but at least somewhat interesting. These days, conquest had become routine, almost boring, but orders were orders, and the Hegemony Council had designated this system for absorption. The humans would surrender, their world would be strip-mined for resources, and their population would be relocated to serve the greater good of the Empire. Within a few cycles, Earth would be just another dot on the vast map of hegemony space. Commander activated his personal communicator. Navigation. Set course for the Sol system. All ships are to maintain standard formation during jump. We will arrive at the edge of their system in 6 hours. Acknowledged, Commander, came the reply from the bridge. 6 hours, and then this brief campaign would begin. Vexthal estimated it would all be over within a day of their arrival. The humans would take one look at his fleet and immediately broadcast their surrender. It was always the same with primitive species. He had no way of knowing that he was about to make the greatest mistake in the history of the Zephyrian hegemony. The massive hegemony flagship Nexus of Dominion dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with a flash of displaced energy that lit up every sensor array from Mercury to Pluto. Behind it, 399 other warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the distant light of Earth's sun. Admiral Kethamaran stood on the bridge of the flagship, his reptilian features set in an expression of supreme confidence. As the designated voice of the hegemony for this operation, he would have the honor of delivering the ultimatum to these primitive humans. It was a role he had performed dozens of times before, always with the same predictable results. Communications, he called out, his voice echoing across the bridge. Open a channel to the third planet. Broadcast on all frequencies. Channel open, Admiral, came the immediate response. Keth Moran straightened his ceremonial armor and activated the recording system. The message would be transmitted not just to Earth, but to every ship and station in the system. It was important that all humans hear what was about to happen to their world. People of Earth, he began, his words automatically translated into the primitive human languages by the ship's computer. I am Admiral Keth Moran of the Zephyrian Hegemony. You have been selected for absorption into our great empire. You have 72 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. All military forces must stand down. All planetary defenses must be deactivated, and your governments must prepare for immediate occupation. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in across the vast distances of space. Resistance is futile. Compliance will be rewarded with fair treatment under hegemony law. Defiance will result in the complete pacification of your world. You have 72 hours. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, and Keth Moran settled back into his command chair with satisfaction. Now came the waiting period, during which the humans would frantically debate among themselves before inevitably reaching the only logical conclusion. Surrender was their only option. On Earth, the transmission was received simultaneously by every government, military installation, and communications array on the planet. In the secure bunker beneath the Swiss Alps that housed the United Earth Defense Council, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the alien message with carefully controlled expression. Around the conference table, representatives from every major nation on Earth sat in stunned silence. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Marcus Webb, was the first to speak. 72 hours, he said quietly. That's not much time to coordinate a response. Response? Demanded General Rodriguez of the Americas Alliance. What response? Can we possibly make against 400 ships? Our entire space fleet couldn't scratch the paint on one of those vessels. Admiral Chen remained silent, though she caught the subtle glance from President Nakamura of the Pacific Federation. Very few people in this room knew the truth about Earth's military capabilities. The deception had been maintained for 30 years, ever since humanity's first contact with hegemony signals had revealed the existence of this aggressive empire. We need to buy time, Webb continued. Perhaps we can negotiate, find some middle ground. There is no middle ground with the hegemony, Admiral Chen finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. I've studied their expansion pattern for decades. They don't negotiate. They conquer, absorb, and move on. However, she paused meaningfully, they do expect some resistance. A complete immediate surrender might actually make them suspicious. General Rodriguez leaned forward. What are you suggesting? We play the part they expect. Desperate governments, trying to find a way out. Fractured leadership unable to agree on a unified response. We request negotiations while appearing to prepare our defenses. And accomplish what exactly? Asked Chancellor Muller of the European Confederation. Delay the inevitable by a few days? Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well caught the slight glint in her eyes. Sometimes a few days can make all the difference. The next several hours passed in a carefully orchestrated display of human panic and indecision. Emergency broadcasts went out across Earth, showing frantic meetings of world leaders and desperate preparations. For defense, military units around the globe were placed on high alert, and the orbital defense platforms around Earth and Mars began powering up their weapons systems. To any observer, it looked exactly like what the hegemony expected, a primitive species, scrambling to mount some sort of hopeless defense against impossible odds. Admiral Keth Moran watched these preparations with amusement from his flagship. The humans were actually trying to fight. How refreshingly naive. Their orbital platforms were impressive for such a primitive species, but they wouldn't last 5 minutes against hegemony firepower. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. They're requesting Negotiations. Of course they are, Kethmoran replied with satisfaction. Put it through. The image of a human appeared on the main screen. The being was smaller than most species the hegemony had encountered, with pale skin and short dark hair. It wore what appeared to be a military uniform covered in colorful decorations. I am General Harrison, speaking for the United Earth Defense Council, the human said. We have received your ultimatum, and we wish to discuss terms. There are no terms, Kethmoran replied coldly. Surrender is unconditional. Surely there must be some room for negotiation, the human pressed. We are a peaceful species. We have done nothing to threaten your empire. Your threat to the hegemony is irrelevant. You occupy a system that has been designated for absorption. You will surrender, or you will be destroyed. The human appeared to confer with others off-screen. When he turned back, his expression was grave. We need more time. Our governments are divided on this issue. Some want to fight, others want to surrender. We need at least a week to reach consensus. You have 72 hours, Kethmoran repeated. Not 1 second more. Please, the human said, and there was genuine desperation in his voice now. You don't understand our political system. We have over 200 separate nations. Getting them all to agree on anything takes months. Can't you give us just a few more days? Kethmoran found himself almost feeling sorry for these pathetic creatures. They truly didn't understand the situation they were in. Very well, he said, magnanimously. I will extend the deadline by 48 additional hours, 120 hours total. But that is my final offer. Thank you, the human said with obvious relief. We will use this time wisely. The transmission ended, and Kethmoran turned to his subordinates. See how easily they break? They're already grateful for a few extra hours of life. This species has no backbone whatsoever. What the Admiral didn't know was that his generous extension had just given Admiral Chen exactly the time she needed. In hidden shipyards throughout the outer system, the final preparations were being completed. Stealth fields were being calibrated, weapon systems were being charged, and 12,000 of the most advanced warships ever constructed by human hands were moving into position. The hegemony fleet continued its slow advance toward Earth, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Their sensors detected the expected signs of frantic human preparation, ships moving between Earth and Mars, defense platforms coming online, and what appeared to be hastily constructed fortifications around major population centers. Everything looked exactly as it should for a primitive species facing inevitable conquest. The humans were playing their part perfectly, appearing weak and desperate while secretly preparing for the largest military operation in their history. As the deadline approached, more transmissions came from Earth. Desperate pleas for additional time, offers of limited cooperation, and increasingly frantic attempts to find some compromise. Each message reinforced the hegemony's belief that they were dealing with a weak, divided species that would crumble at the first sign of real force. Admiral Chen coordinated the deception from her hidden command center in the Kuiper Belt, watching as hegemony ships moved deeper into the system. Every hour brought them closer to the trap that had been 30 years in the making. The countdown continued, and with each passing moment, the hegemony's confidence grew while Earth's apparent desperation deepened. It was exactly what Admiral Chen wanted them to think. The hegemony fleet moved deeper into the Sol system like a pack of predators closing in on wounded prey. Admiral Kethmoran stood on his bridge, watching with satisfaction as his ships took up positions around the inner planets. The humans were putting up exactly the kind of pathetic resistance he had expected. Their orbital defense platforms had powered up around Earth and Mars, bristling with primitive kinetic weapons and basic energy shields. Small patrol craft buzzed between the platforms like insects, their simple engines leaving bright trails across his tactical displays. Most amusing of all, the humans had actually assembled what they probably considered a battle fleet near Earth's moon. Status report, Keth Moran commanded. 47 human vessels have taken up defensive positions around their homeworld, his tactical officer reported. Mostly small frigates and destroyers. Their largest ship appears to be some sort of command vessel, roughly 400 meters in length. Weapons capabilities? Primitive kinetic projectiles, basic laser arrays, and what appears to be nuclear missiles. Nothing that could penetrate our shields. Keth Moran nodded. It was exactly what their intelligence had predicted. These humans had clearly mobilized everything they had, and it still amounted to less firepower than a single hegemony cruiser. The orbital platforms might be able to damage smaller ships, but they were stationary targets that could be eliminated within minutes. What about their negotiations? He asked his communications officer. Still ongoing, Admiral. They keep requesting additional time and offering various forms of limited surrender. Their latest proposal involves maintaining autonomy over their homeworld in exchange for tribute payments. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in amusement. These creatures still didn't understand that they had nothing to negotiate with. The hegemony didn't make deals with primitives. They conquered them, absorbed their resources, and moved on to the next target. Continue to monitor their transmissions, he ordered. Let them waste their final hours on false hope. What Admiral Keth Moran didn't realize was that every human ship he could see, every defense platform his sensors detected, and every frantic transmission his communications array intercepted was carefully placed exactly where Admiral Sarah Chen wanted them to be. Far beyond the range of hegemony sensors, hidden within the icy depths of the Kuiper Belt, Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the most sophisticated military installation humanity had ever constructed. The facility was built into an asteroid that had been hollowed out and reinforced over 3 decades of secret construction. From the outside, it looked like any other piece of space debris. From the inside, it was the nerve center of the largest fleet ever assembled. Status report from all task forces, she commanded. Captain Williams, her chief of staff, consulted his displays. Task Force Alpha is in position behind Jupiter. 2,000 ships maintaining full stealth. Task Force Beta has completed deployment in the asteroid belt. 3,000 ships ready for activation. Task Force Gamma reports all systems green from Saturn's rings. 4,000 ships standing by. Admiral Chen nodded as the reports continued. Task Force Delta was hidden in the shadow of Uranus with 2,000 ships. Task Force Echo had dispersed throughout the outer system with another 1,000 vessels. The remaining ships were scattered in small groups throughout the solar system, their advanced stealth technology making them invisible to hegemony sensors. Total combat readiness? 12,000 ships, Admiral. All systems operational, all. Crews at battle stations, 12,000 ships, the number still amazed her sometimes. For 30 years, humanity had poured every available resource into this moment. Hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt had worked around the clock. Mining operations throughout the outer system had gathered the materials. The brightest minds of their species had developed technologies that the hegemony couldn't even imagine. And all of it had been done in complete secrecy, hidden behind a carefully crafted facade of primitive technology and divided governments. Time to deadline? 18 hours, Admiral. Chen walked to the massive display that dominated the center of the command facility. It showed the entire solar system in real time, with every ship and installation marked by tiny symbols. The hegemony fleet showed as red dots moving steadily toward Earth, while her own forces appeared as blue dots scattered throughout the system like seeds waiting to sprout. Admiral, Captain Martinez at the communications station called out, "Incoming transmission from the deception team." The image of General Harrison appeared on a secondary screen. To the hegemony, he was the desperate leader of a doomed world. In reality, he was one of Chen's most trusted officers, playing his role to perfection. "Admiral, the hegemony is requesting a final answer. They're becoming impatient with our stalling tactics." "Perfect," Chen replied. "Continue the performance. Make them believe we're on the verge of complete surrender. I want them feeling supremely confident when the deadline arrives." Understood. The fleet elements around Earth are maintaining their positions. The hegemony still believes they are looking at our entire military force. Chen smiled. The fleet around Earth consisted of exactly 47 ships, just as the hegemony sensors had detected. What they didn't know was that these were old training vessels and converted cargo haulers, crewed by volunteers whose only job was to look threatening enough to maintain the illusion. The real fleet was invisible, waiting in the darkness. How? Are our weapon systems? All ships report ready, Admiral. The new plasma lance arrays have been tested and calibrated. Quantum torpedo launchers are loaded and armed. Kinetic bombardment platforms are online and targeted. Chen had overseen the development of these weapons personally. When humanity first intercepted hegemony communications 30 years ago, they had learned valuable information about alien technology and tactics. More importantly, they had learned about hegemony weaknesses. The aliens were overconfident. They relied on overwhelming numbers and superior technology to win quick victories against primitive species. They had never faced an enemy that was prepared. For them, never encountered weapons designed specifically to counter their defenses. Status of Operation Olympus? All components ready for activation, Admiral. The moment you give the signal, every ship in the fleet will decloak simultaneously. Operation Olympus. The culmination of 30 years of planning, preparation, and sacrifice. The moment when humanity would reveal that they were not the primitive, divided species the hegemony believed them to be. Chen thought about all the years of careful deception. The fake exploration vessels sent out with deliberately primitive technology. The staged conflicts between Earth nations to maintain the illusion of division. The mining operations disguised as scientific research. The massive construction projects hidden behind asteroid field surveys. Every detail had been planned to reinforce the hegemony's preconceptions about human weakness, and it had worked perfectly. The alien fleet was moving into the exact position her strategists had predicted, confident in their overwhelming superiority and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're detecting increased hegemony chatter. They appear to be discussing final attack positions." "Let me hear it." The translated alien voices filled the command center. Chen listened as hegemony officers casually discussed which human cities to target first, how to divide up Earth's resources, and where to relocate the surviving human population. They spoke about her species like cattle being prepared for slaughter. Her expression never changed, but everyone in the command center could feel the cold anger radiating from their admiral. This was why they had spent 30 years preparing. This was why 12,000 ships waited in the darkness. These aliens had come to destroy humanity's home, and they were about to learn why that had been a fatal mistake. Time to deadline? 14 hours, Admiral. 14 hours until the hegemony expected humanity's final surrender. 14 hours until the most arrogant military force in the galaxy learned what it meant to underestimate the human species. Admiral Chen returned to studying the tactical display, watching as the red dots of the hegemony fleet moved into their final positions. Soon, very soon, those red dots would be surrounded by a constellation of blue ones as 12,000 Terran warships revealed themselves. The trap was set. The prey was moving into position, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The deadline had arrived. Admiral Keth Morin stood on the bridge of the Nexus of Dominion, watching the chronometer count down the final seconds. Around him, his officers maintained their positions with the calm confidence of professional soldiers who had performed this ritual dozens of times before. In a few moments, they would demand Earth's final answer, and when the inevitable refusal came, they would begin the bombardment that would bring this primitive world to its knees. "Time," announced his navigation officer. "Open a channel to Earth," Keth Morin commanded. "Let's end this charade." The familiar image of General Harrison appeared on the main screen. but something was different. The human's expression was no longer desperate or pleading. Instead, he wore a strange smile that seemed completely out of place for someone facing imminent destruction. "General Harrison," Keth Moran began, "the deadline has expired. What is your final answer?" "Our answer," Harrison replied, his voice strangely calm, "is that Earth respectfully declines your offer." The bridge fell silent for a moment. In all his years of conquest, Keth Moran had never heard such a casual rejection delivered with such confidence. Usually, primitive species either surrendered immediately or issued desperate defiant speeches about fighting to the death. This human sounded almost amused. "Very well," the Admiral said slowly. "You have chosen destruction. All ships, prepare to commence bombardment of the third planet. Target major population centers first." "Actually," Harrison interrupted, "before you do that, you might want to check your sensors." Keth Moran felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in the human's tone, a confidence that made no sense given the situation. "What are you talking about?" "Admiral Chen," Harrison said, speaking to someone off-screen. "I think it's time to show our guests what Earth is really capable of." The transmission cut out, leaving Keth Moran staring at a blank screen. For a moment, nothing happened. The hegemony fleet maintained its positions around Earth, weapons powered and ready to begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. Then, every sensor on every ship in the hegemony fleet exploded into activity simultaneously. "Admiral!" his sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Contacts! Multiple contacts! They're everywhere!" Keth Moran spun toward the tactical display, and what he saw there made his blood freeze in his veins. The space around his fleet, which had been empty just seconds before, was now filled with thousands upon thousands of new contacts. Ships were materializing out of nothing, their stealth fields dropping to reveal hulls that gleamed with advanced armor and weapons technology. "How many?" he whispered. "Still counting, Admiral. Current count is 8,000, 9,000, 10,000. The officer's voice rose with each number. "Admiral, I'm reading 12,000 hostile contacts, 12,000 ships." The number was impossible. The humans were supposed to have 50 warships at most. Where had 12,000 vessels come from? "That's impossible," Keth Moran said. But even as he spoke, he could see the truth displayed on his screens. The human fleet wasn't just larger than his own. It was massive beyond comprehension. His 400 ships were suddenly outnumbered 30-1. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, his voice shaking. "Incoming transmission. It's on all frequencies." A new face appeared on the main screen. This human was clearly female, with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to look directly into Keth Moran's soul. She wore a military uniform that was far more sophisticated than anything the hegemony had seen from this species. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Deep Space Fleet," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You wanted to know if Earth would fight back. Congratulations, you're about to witness the birth of the Terran Empire." Behind her, Keth Moran could see a bridge that was clearly far more advanced than anything in his own fleet. Holographic displays showed tactical information that his own computers couldn't even process. Officers moved with the precision of a military force that had been preparing for this moment for decades. "This is impossible," Keth Moran said, though he knew his words were being broadcast to the human admiral. "Our intelligence indicated you were a primitive species." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "Your intelligence was exactly what we wanted you to see. For 30 years, we've been preparing for this moment. Every signal you intercepted, every ship you detected, every report your scouts filed, all of it was carefully crafted to make you believe we were weak and divided." The truth hit Keth Moran like a physical blow. The humans had been planning this. They had known the hegemony was coming and had spent decades preparing for war. The primitive technology, the divided governments, the desperate negotiations. All of it had been an elaborate deception. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out urgently, "the human ships are moving into attack formation. They're surrounding us." Keth Moran looked at his displays and saw that it was true. The 12,000 human vessels were moving with perfect coordination, their formations flowing around his fleet like water around rocks. This wasn't the panicked response of a primitive species. This was the carefully orchestrated maneuver of a military force that had been training for this exact scenario. "All ships," he ordered, "power weapons and prepare for combat. Target the nearest human vessels." "Admiral," Chen's voice cut through his commands, "I wouldn't recommend that course of action." On the tactical display, Keth Moran watched as ports opened on the human ships. But these weren't the primitive kinetic weapons and basic lasers his intelligence had described. These were weapons unlike anything he had ever seen, crackling with energy signatures that his computers couldn't identify. "You see," Chen continued, "while you were conquering primitive species across the galaxy, we were studying you. Every battle, every tactic, every weakness in your technology, we learned it all. And then we built a fleet specifically designed to counter everything you could throw at us." One of the human ships, massive beyond anything Keth Moran had imagined possible, moved closer to his flagship. It was easily twice the size of his own vessel, its hull covered in weapon systems that seemed to bend the very laws of physics. "That ship," Chen said, noting his attention, "is the TNS Indomitable. My flagship? It's equipped with weapons your scientists assured you were theoretically impossible. Would you like a demonstration?" "All ships," Keth Moran ordered desperately, "open fire. Destroy that vessel." Every weapon in his fleet that could target the Indomitable opened fire simultaneously. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles converged on the massive human ship in a display of firepower that should have reduced it to atoms. The energy simply splashed harmlessly against the ship's shields like raindrops on a window. "Impressive," Chen said calmly. "Our turn." A single weapon fired from the Indomitable. Keth Moran had never seen anything like it, a beam of pure energy that seemed to tear through space itself. It struck one of his destroyers, and the ship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not blown apart. It was there one moment and gone. The next, as if it had been erased from reality. "What do you want?" Keth Moran asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What we want," Chen replied, "is very simple. Your fleet will surrender immediately. Any ship that attempts to flee will be destroyed. Any ship that continues to resist will be destroyed. You came here to conquer Earth. Instead, you've given us the perfect opportunity to announce humanity's presence to the galaxy." Keth Moran looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. The supreme confidence they had carried into this system was gone, replaced by the stark realization that they were completely outmatched. The humans hadn't just been ready for them. They had been superior to them all along. "Admiral," his communications officer said quietly, "the fleet commanders are requesting instructions." Keth Moran stared at the tactical display, where his 400 ships sat surrounded by 12,000 human vessels like insects caught in a web. There was no escape, no hope of victory, no chance of even inflicting meaningful damage on their opponents. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Keth Moran gave an order he had never imagined speaking. "All ships, stand down and prepare to surrender." On her flagship, Admiral Chen allowed herself a small smile. The trap had worked perfectly. Now the real work could begin. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than 20 minutes. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as the last hegemony ships powered down their weapons and activated their surrender beacons. Of the four, 100 vessels that had entered the Sol system with such confidence, 312 had surrendered intact. The remaining 88 had chosen to fight and had been systematically destroyed by weapons they couldn't comprehend. "Admiral," Captain Williams reported, "all hegemony vessels have been secured. Boarding parties are taking control of surrendered ships, and survivors from destroyed vessels are being rescued." Chen nodded. Despite everything the hegemony had planned to do to Earth, she had ordered her forces to show mercy to those who surrendered. It was important that the galaxy understand the difference between humanity and their former oppressors. "What about their flagship?" "Admiral Kethmaran is aboard the Nexus of Dominion under guard. He's requested to speak with you." "Later," Chen replied. "First, I want to speak with our other guests." On the secondary screen, Commander Vex Thal appeared. The Zephyrian officer who had originally planned this invasion looked like a broken man. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides, and his mandibles clicked nervously as he stared at the human admiral who had just destroyed his entire worldview. "Commander," Chen said pleasantly, "I trust you're beginning to understand your situation." "How?" Vex Thal asked, his voice barely audible. "How did you hide 12,000 ships? Our sensors detected nothing. Our intelligence indicated you were primitives." Chen's expression remained neutral. "Your sensors detected exactly what we wanted them to detect. As for your intelligence, it was based on 30-year-old observations of decoy vessels we sent out specifically to be captured and studied. The truth was even more devastating than Vex Thal had imagined. You've been planning this for 3 decades. We've been preparing for war since the day we first intercepted hegemony communications and learned of your existence. Every human colony, every mining operation, every seemingly civilian project was part of our military buildup. While you were conquering primitive species, we were building the most advanced fleet in galactic history." Chen activated a holographic display showing the solar system. Red icons marked the positions of captured hegemony ships, while blue icons showed the vast human fleet maintaining perfect formation around them. "You see, Commander, humanity learned something very important from studying your expansion. The hegemony has never faced serious resistance because you only attack species you believe are weaker than you. You've never encountered an enemy that was prepared and waiting." Vex Thal's mandibles clicked frantically. "The Council must be warned. They need to know what you are capable of." "Oh, they'll know," Chen replied with a cold smile. "Captain Martinez, have our intelligence teams finished their work?" "Yes, Admiral. We've downloaded the complete navigation database from every hegemony ship. We now have the locations of all their military bases, supply depots, and conquered worlds." Chen turned back to Vex Thal. "Thank you for bringing us such complete intelligence on your empire. It will make our next phase much more efficient." "Next phase?" The commander's voice cracked with fear. "Did you really think we would stop with defending Earth? You came here to conquer and enslave humanity. Now we're going to return the favor. But we'll be liberating the species you've oppressed." Even as Chen spoke, Task Force Alpha was already jumping to hyperspace. 2,000 of humanity's most advanced warships were following the retreating hegemony vessels back to their staging areas and supply bases. The aliens had expected to return home with news of another easy victory. Instead, they were leading Earth's fleet directly to the heart of hegemony space. "Admiral," Captain Williams called out, "incoming transmission from Task Force Beta. They've arrived at the Kepler Station Supply Depot." The main screen switched to show Captain Rodriguez aboard the TNS Defiance. Behind him, through the bridge windows, the massive hegemony supply station was clearly visible, along with the 43 alien ships that had been refueling there. "Admiral, the station commander surrendered immediately when he saw our fleet. We've secured significant supplies and intelligence data. More importantly, we've also liberated over 2 million beings from 17 different species who were being held as slave labor." Chen felt a surge of satisfaction. This was why they had built their fleet, why they had spent 30 years preparing for war. not just to defend Earth, but to free the countless beings suffering under hegemony oppression. Excellent work, Captain. Proceed to your next objective. Similar reports came in from task forces Gamma, Delta, and Echo, across a dozen star systems. Hegemony installations were falling to human forces with the same speed and efficiency that had characterized the Sol system battle. Weapons depots, mining colonies, and military bases that had taken the aliens decades to establish were being captured in a matter of hours. But perhaps the most important victory was happening in the deepest levels of hegemony space. Task Force Zulu, consisting of humanity's fastest ships, had jumped directly to the hegemony capital system. Their mission wasn't conquest, but communication. To broadcast Earth's message to every world in the Empire simultaneously. Admiral, the communications officer reported, Task Force Zulu confirms successful transmission. The message is being broadcast on all hegemony frequencies. Chen had crafted that message carefully. It was being transmitted in the languages of every species the hegemony had conquered, offering them something they had never been given before: a choice. The message was simple. People of the galaxy, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Fleet. The age of hegemony oppression is ending. We offer you freedom, alliance, and protection. Any world that wishes to join the new galactic alliance will have Earth's full support. Any world that chooses to remain independent will be respected. The only thing we will not tolerate is the continued enslavement of sentient beings. Within hours of the broadcast, responses began pouring in from across hegemony space. Conquered. Worlds that had suffered under alien rule for centuries were declaring independence. Species that had been enslaved for generations were rising up against their oppressors. The hegemony's empire was dissolving faster than they could respond to. Admiral, came another report, the Hegemony Council has issued an emergency decree. They're mobilizing their reserve fleets and calling for negotiations. Chen almost laughed. Now they wanted to negotiate. When they thought they were dealing with primitives, there had been no room for discussion, but faced with an enemy that could match their strength, suddenly diplomacy became attractive. Tell them I'll be happy to meet with their representatives, she replied, at the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime, in exactly 1 month. The Galactic Council, the governing body that had rubber-stamped hegemony expansion for centuries while ignoring the pleas of smaller species for protection. Chen intended to address them personally, to announce humanity's arrival on the galactic stage and the new reality they would all have to accept. She turned back to Commander Vexthal, who had been listening to these reports with growing horror. Commander, you're going to be our guest for the immediate future. I want you to see what happens when the galaxy learns that the hegemony can be defeated. You don't understand, Vexthal said desperately. You're starting a galactic war. Billions will die. Billions have already died under hegemony rule, Chen replied coldly. The only difference is that now they have someone willing to fight for them. Reports continued to flow in throughout the day. Hegemony fleets across the galaxy were either surrendering or being destroyed by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. 3 centuries of expansion were being rolled back in a matter of hours, but perhaps the most satisfying report came from Captain Thompson aboard the TNS Liberation. His task force had reached the slave world of Kepler 442b, where over 50 million beings from dozens of species had been forced to work in hegemony mining operations. Admiral, Thompson reported, the slaves have been freed and the hegemony overseers have surrendered. The former prisoners are asking if the stories are true, if Earth really came to liberate them. Tell them, Chen said quietly, that Earth keeps its promises. As the sun set over the Sol system, Admiral Chen stood before the massive viewport in her ready room, looking out at the fleet that had changed galactic history in a single day. 12,000 human ships maintained their positions around the captured hegemony vessels, while far beyond, the lights of Earth glittered like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Tomorrow, she would address the Galactic Council. She would tell them that humanity had arrived, that the age of unchallenged oppression was over, and that any species that chose freedom would have Earth's protection. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. And Earth, peaceful, divided, primitive Earth, had just proven that some sleeping giants are best left undisturbed. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of humanity had begun.